Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic Podcast. Today, our guest is Pat Sheridan, CEO of Modus Create. Pat has led Modus through every stage of growth and turned the business into a premier global product and engineering partner. And I should know because I'm one of their customers. Pat has built a remarkable team at Modus that works across industries and has expertise on a broad array of different platforms. So everything from consumer, ed tech, health tech, fintech, and more. Their clients include Audi, Marriott, and a host of other blue chip companies. Pat has also built an amazing culture at Modus, which I've experienced firsthand, and actually we'll get into that a little bit today in our conversation. I've known Pat for more than 10 years now, and we've had some great discussions, but this is the first time we've gotten together in this format, so it should be fun. I can tell we're going to learn a lot from listening to Pat about leadership, building companies, AI, and so much more. So I'm super excited. Welcome to the podcast, Pat.
Bobby, thank you. I'm going to have to write all that down. I appreciate the intro and the partnership throughout the years. Maybe
Absolutely.
just to start it off, just kind of, I wouldn't add a lot to that other than to say we started this company in the wake of the last financial crisis, kind of coming out of '08, when the innovation at that time was the smartphone. And we were really thinking a lot about when was that device, what needed to happen for that to create a market-making, change in
Right.
terms of how technology faces that. And it seems like we're at one of those similar points now. We started the company to be very boutiquely focused on that intersection of what type of open source was going to be needed to open up the smartphone economy and what amount of design thinking needed to really add value to that to businesses. And, we've brought in quite a bit from that time to really look at how do companies have structures for corporate innovation? How do you actually know where to position partners and open source and commercial technologies? So really excited to get, we've obviously had firsthand experience together trying to build those kind of structures and partnerships. So really excited to have this conversation today.
Yeah, Pat, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do this. And usually this is where I turn it over to my co-host for some fun trivia questions, but Mishka's out today. So, Pat, you've been spared, and actually it's perfect for us to just dive right into some of these topics that me and you kind of toss around here and there. And today we got a chance to kind of formally talk through it. I'll start off with sort of the big hot item in the minds of a lot of our audience in product and technology, which is AI and what all is happening with AI. And I think the first thing I'd put out there is kind of your thought on, like, is AI as sort of transformational as a lot of people believe it to be? Obviously, we're deep in the hype cycle of it all. There's, a lot of conversation, a lot of funding, a lot of startup companies around AI, a tremendous amount of innovation happening for sure. But is it as revolutionary as people think? Is it as big as the internet, for example? Like, what's your take on that, just at a very macro level?
Yeah, and this is on everyone's mind. I've spent the last year talking to executives, as I mentioned in my intro, around how are you formalizing corporate innovation and how does AI affect that? Is it just one more thing you're running through as if it's any new technology, or is it something fundamentally transformative to the business? So before I kind of talk about that in terms of my opinion Modus, but in terms of just the executives that I'm talking to, everyone is seeing it as changing everything, because they're looking beyond, say, this idea of a intelligent application or building onto what was their existing data strategy for the business. And they're looking at it in terms of every element of the business. Does it change how we put invoices together? Does it change, what I mean? A myriad of core operational focuses in the business. And having worked in and around private equity-backed businesses, when I think about the way we put the thesis together for growth investment for Modus, and when I talk to other operating partners and private equity firms, everyone is looking at their theses for industries and trying to do a disruption analysis on AI to the industry. So I do think, while yes, we are living through an immense hype cycle right now, I do think that this is going to be fundamentally transformative. However, I would just calibrate that by saying, if you look at some of the recent quotes by folks like Andy Jassy, who says, by using AI, they saved something like 4,500 man years in updating legacy Java applications. That is an amazing amount of efficiency and
That's insane, yeah.
but they're not cutting their number of software engineers. This is like a leverage ratio, right? On where then do your engineers focus on? If you're not wasting 4,500 man years, which I can't even imagine the dollar cost of that, then it seems that there's going to be an acceleration of more value-added activities that position companies in the market, which is at the end of the day, right, what we're all kind of in the business of doing, is understanding the addressable market of our business and how these technologies are going to help that or hurt that.
It's interesting. Somebody who works deeply in AI was telling me the other day that she said the adoption of AI is nowhere near as fast as what she thought it would be in comparison to the technical innovation. So technical innovation is certainly zooming by. Every week you hear all kinds of new ideas come through, but adoption in companies not happening as fast as she thought. And this is a pretty connected person. And I asked her why, and she said something interesting, which was there's not enough product managers who care about it, who are forcing the adoption of it in most companies.
Hello.
Do you agree with that, or do you see something maybe different than that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it depends on the scale of your business. So, in my universe, a lot of our legacy customer base is early stage, right? Like still looking for product market fit, or their growth stage, and they're able to deploy a lot. When you get into working with enterprises, when I look at this kind of triangle, it's AI as the top. That's what everyone's looking at. Security over here and platforms over here.
That's interesting.
For the bigger companies, they've had so many issues. If you think about things like these S-bombs, right? What's your software bill of materials? How do you know with all these supply chain attacks, what are you sitting on top of, and what all your vendor, right, commercial stack is sitting on top of? When you then have a legal department at a bigger company that has to approve usage of a tool like Copilot in GitHub, that could be a block. It's not a technical blocker, or maybe there are product owners there, but the company at its scale and risk exposure is putting extra sets of due diligence on this. And I think especially, historically with things like GDPR and data security, where multinationals based in Europe are going to be more wary of some kind of technology like this coming out of the US and have extra regulatory layers. So on the other side, some of the AI startups that I've seen and some in the ed tech space, these are kids right out of college that have gotten to multiple million in run rate in less than 12 months using, a very forward approach on AI from a product perspective, and not using traditional sales channels, going straight to social media influencers, etc.
That's right.
So you're seeing innovation on both sides of the equation of customer acquisition and product development. So I think unfortunately it's one of those it depends answers, but in general, we've all seen companies that fall into this feature accretion trap where they're just not selling well their core features, and just layering on a bunch of AI schmaltz, isn't going to magically save,
There's a lot of that going on. Absolutely. There's a lot of AI whitewashing happening where suddenly every product has an AI component to it, or the whole thing is AI, but not really. It's just a marketing thing. What's fascinating to me is that I invested in a startup recently where the CTO started using Cursor and this other product called Vercel that does like a lot of like
front end
text,
cloud,
front end generation from text type of stuff. And so he's using a stack of like Cursor, Vercel. I think Replit was another product that he was using, tool that he was using, and the team is going lightning fast. And I'm looking around at these other companies, at $50 million companies, $100 million companies, and they're honestly not catching on all that fast to this stuff. They're still doing things in like the old way. So forget if like AI can come in and suddenly write your product requirements for you. I'm even just talking about like core engineering work. A lot of companies just are not adopting it that fast from what I see. But the first time I used Gen AI and started playing around with it, I had that same lightning bolt feeling that I had when I messed around with the mobile, with the first mobile phone and first time getting on the internet for us old guys out there.
Sure.
Okay, I didn't have the same feeling with blockchain I didn't
No.
have the same feeling with cloud. Cloud as a CTO to me was just, all right, let's take all of our stuff and put it in AWS or whatever. This feels truly revolutionary with stuff like Cursor,
Yeah.
where you really do have a small junior engineering team in a box almost now. We're at that level with
Yeah.
this stuff.
I
It's
asked,
incredible.
I agree. I mean, look, I think this gets to some of the culture elements that we talked about, right? What is the internal
Yeah,
cultural momentum, just in terms of the trade craft of not all companies are on a journey to improve the quality of the trade craft on some of this legacy tech and legacy thinking. And it'll be just like any other innovation where the last position you want to be in as a technology leader is by the time you see your competitor in the rear view mirror, they've passed you, right? And it's just really hard to
right.
catch up. But if you look at some going in assumptions for me with AI are, and I think this is where you see some surveys coming out of companies like McKinsey and others where they're looking at, okay, does AI make a junior developer right out of college how productive relative to a very senior person in the before time in the before times, right?
Right.
Can a junior person be? How much more productive does it make a senior person? Where my, you know, my whole career, people have been telling me that some new tool was going to put me out of a job. You kind of, as a technologist, you get 15 years in your career and you realize like there's no low code, no code solution. All of that generates code that someone is going to have to look at some point in time if the business is of appropriate enough enterprise scale, right? But I think the productivity quotient of how fast can you learn something, and to your point, we acquired a business very focused in more computer science and software engineering and languages like Haskell, right? Like real kind of the high integrity software for trading systems, nuclear source code
Hmm.
systems, right? Blockchain store of value. And my experiment to myself was on a random Saturday, got a big cup of coffee, pot of coffee, and I, in 4 hours, was able to deploy an entire dev environment, right, into containers. I was able to build not only a Hello World application, but a full app that could take the name, location, title of a person, generate a random shape, and generate a mural that we could paint on the wall, all written in Haskell. I've never written a line of Haskell. 4 hours, right?
Hmm.
And when I think about that, would have otherwise taken me 4 months of full-time dedicated study, mentoring, and my own projects. That is transformative. And when I think about things like composable ERP, when I think about all the kind of analysis that you want to run on productivity of a team, or, detailed things that terrible UIs on these legacy ERP systems,
Right.
that we're going to be able to have conversational analytics, right? To get better understanding of what's happening with our team and our business. And then in terms of the business, just getting more throughput. And this is my whole kind of mantra, if you will, which is the companies that win focus on throughput over scale, right? They're like, how many things can we move through so that we find the great ideas that hide behind good ideas? And this kind of technology is dramatically increasing throughput in a way that I think others can't, grasp.
Absolutely. It's funny. I advise a bunch of companies and they ask me these types of questions about what we should do with AI. And I'm like, you remember when there was such a thing as a webmaster back in
Yes,
the day, 20 years ago?
right.
There's no such thing as webmasters anymore. So there's going to be a lot of shifting and in roles and organizational design with AI. That's for sure.
In my early career, there was director of internet. Then there was director of mobile, right? Then there's going to be
Right.
director of cloud. And I'm like, look, whenever you see director of AI, it's like at the end of the day, it all just gets absorbed into product, right? And
Right.
technology. But we are in the phase where if there's specific titles, AI guru or whatever, we're still figuring out how this shapes the organization.
I was going to ask you if you're a big believer in Jevons paradox. Have you heard of this thing?
I think I have, but you're going to have to refresh me. Sorry.
Yeah, this is where like if you improve the efficiency of something, the consumption of it goes up, not down. And it's
Yes.
kind of counterintuitive, but like an example they often give is like when Henry Ford started producing cars much faster, the demand for cars just went up and up and up infinitely. Do you think that we're going to be producing 100 times more software like 2 years from now, just globally in the world?
I do. I think I noticed some Instagram reel with Ben Horowitz mentioning something about this as it related to the early days of the internet. I think macroeconomically, there's going to be more software in the future, not less. When I talk to some of the founders of companies that have joined Modus in the last 2.5 years, where I've refined that is, but maybe computers are writing most of that software as opposed to people. And I think in general, the course of human history is that we commodify very complex tools into approachable tools, and that expands the market. And you and I have both lived through the joys and frustrations of dealing with PHP as a code base. So when you think about these first order languages like C# and C++ and Java, etc., but how the web was really fueled by scripting languages like JavaScript and PHP because they were, an inch wide and a mile, or was it an inch deep and a mile wide? But it enabled like quasi web developers to not be fully trained software engineers, but be hyper productive and learnable. And I feel like this learning curve on these technologies will come down. And
That's really good. Yeah.
Just like with any Gen AI tools, I think, I started my career coming in from the creative side of web design, those webmaster type roles, and growing into kind of the front end universe. And back then, people would say to me, well, you're not a real designer because you're using the Mac and the computer and Photoshop, And I thought to myself, well, which one of us will be here 5 years from now, right? And I do think in that same way, you're seeing some of that. Oh, you're not a real engineer if you're not writing all the code. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But which one of you is going to be here 5 years from now if that's your opinion, right? It's a tool. Use the tool. If there's a class of applications, the analogy that I love is that anyone can build a doghouse, whether you download a plan from the internet or not. Maybe not everyone can build a shed. Not everyone's going to build a single family home. And some software is really like building a skyscraper. And when you think about the class of tools that apply to different scales of architecture, when you commodify things, you typically are commodifying the easier things, And I think even if you look at the precursor to AI with low code, no code solutions, they all pretty much generated the same kind of internal portal or system out of the box. They weren't doing banking software with no code stuff. Right. But I do think AI has the potential to just keep getting more, to move up that complexity curve quicker than people would normally, right?
That brings up a good point around low code platforms. Do you think that they still have a place in the pantheon of software ecosystems and tools and building complex systems? Are they going to adopt AI, in your opinion, the most because that can kind of help their use case the most? Or do you think that AI kind of makes them a non-entity almost? Like, what is your thought on the low code platforms?
Yeah, I have to caveat it with, we don't partner with any of them. We generally don't play there because the business cases are somewhat limited in terms of custom software development or enterprise scale software. And I've always seen them as kind of like, it's a quick and easy way it's like copying a WordPress website or some such thing. It's just doing some of that for you for non-technical people. I think AI is a challenge to it. I think it's probably in all of their advantage to enable whatever they're doing. With AI, I've always asked low-code, no-code people one question because, in a friendly kind of professional jousting kind of way, I would say to folks, at some point someone has to deal with the generated code when it doesn't work. And the low-code people would be saying back to me, well, guys like you won't be needed, X number of years from now. And I always say, okay, well, who's your worst client? Just talk to me about that. And it's always some large bank that doesn't know how to write requirements. So my kind of take, without strong data points here is it doesn't matter how efficiently your code generation is if you don't know what you're building and you don't know what the business rules are.
Like where PLG is much more of an emphasis, you mean? Versus like sales-led growth or some other kind of strategy like product-led growth. Seems like it's making some headway in different industries where, people are just trying to, let's say you're pivoting from being a services business to a tech-enabled service business. You want to get good at product-led growth. AI can maybe help you do that because now you can test out 50 different use cases all at the same time. You don't have to wait
Yeah.
for engineering to build something. You can, you know what I mean? That seems like it's starting to
Yeah.
catch more fire.
Yeah, and I'll give you a trend in that regard that I am seeing, right? So, and I'm talking about now, our focus is on multinational firms that are operating in 6 global markets with more than, say, 10 or 20 brand, okay? So with Marriott, that's hotels. With Audi and VW, that's car brands, right? With folks like Pfizer, that is therapeutics. When you shift from a field-based sales strategy to direct to consumer, right? And this, you see this with parts companies, all kinds of industries. And with integrated platforms, you can get per consumer, per transaction intelligence. I mean, if you just look at what mobile pre-ordering did to quick service food, right, 10 years ago, Burger King, I think 4x'd its lunchtime revenue per location. That is unheard of, right? That's just by introducing the phone. That is not by knowing that you only eat breakfast there and I only eat chicken. You know what I'm saying? And so
Yeah.
when you think about companies that are able to get these data platforms in place, get AI kind of tooling, and whether it's through tools like Launch Darkly that allow you to kind of scale up A/B testing or feature flagging, et cetera, or it's by just using your own, to your point, product-led growth strategies. But the fact that you can have campaigns at a consumer level, right, that was unheard of. People are thinking demographic level. Guys, 18-year-old men eat more fast food than, whatever it is, 50-year-old men. Now you're saying, okay, I've got your personalized entire history of everything you've ever done for this company, and I can triangulate and predict what you're going to want next.
Pat, that's really thoughtful. My view is like if you look at AI driving so much software volume increase just overall in the world, I think product-led growth becomes more of a realizable thing to more companies. Companies that previously were pretty bad at software and product suddenly become really good at product and can actually do something where product-led growth becomes a thing in their company, where actual revenue is generated from product-led as opposed to like sales-led or
Yeah.
whatever. I see it definitely on the investor side already happening for the product managers and product teams that are embracing AI. The
Mm-hmm.
ones that are not afraid of it, they're starting to use it. So not just from an engineering perspective, but also on the product side, maybe they're using it to do something as simple as record a discovery call and then later analyze it and come up with some insights. Or maybe they're even using it as the Gen AI part of AI to write requirements and things of that
Yeah.
nature. Wherever this kind of efficiency is happening, the potential for growth is also a lot more on the PLG side, at least, because you can just produce products, test products a lot faster,
Yeah.
and test their onboarding a lot faster, and test their marketing a lot faster. And so when you partner with marketing teams that are also using these more AI-based tools, then it just becomes so much more powerful. But some companies obviously afraid of the phenomenon of AI. Some companies embracing it a lot more. Some companies, they have a great growth story, so they don't care as much about it right now. Maybe they'll care later when growth slows down. So it varies, but the companies that seem to be embracing it more seem to be closer to PLG. Last question on your sort of like AI views is when you look at the limiters of AI innovation, and you hear Sam Altman talking about the power consumption of AI, NVIDIA obviously doing so much with chips, so many different companies trying to efficientize, obviously, AI, small language models as opposed to large language models, all these different things happening. Do you feel like we are on that like exponential geometric growth rate of AI innovation, or is this all going to stop? Innovation is going to slow down massively after, let's say, GPT-5 or something. Like, what's your take on that?
I think it's going to accelerate personally. I mean, again, I feel like as executives, you kind of have to set some mandates, right, for education. I've always seen in my career 3 phases of CIOs, CTOs. The first is where you have fundamental business model disruption, like you're a paper magazine that never figured out how to monetize web and then you're struggling on mobile. It sucks to be that person, but a lot of those CTOs, product folks, are forced to adopt all the tools because fundamentally they're on a sinking ship. They have to throw. Now, within that first wave of CIOs, CTOs, I've always seen then a second wave, which are folks that actually see huge operational efficiencies with the new thing. So I mentioned like shifting from field sales to, mobile-enabled field sales or direct to consumer. There'll be some companies that see this as a way, like I think right now in the current conversation, everyone's looking at call centers as the first lamb to the slaughter of AI. So people want to see how are companies that enable, because some companies are like, I love this. This is great. It's going to lower my cost to run a call center. Well, I think if you look at the companies that provide they write software for call centers, what are they doing? Because they better be doing something, and people are going to be looking at it. And then you have the third wave, and typically those in my experience are folks in highly regulated industries like banking, healthcare, et cetera, where they have to move a little bit slower, and they have to go through regulatory compliance and data integrity checks, et cetera, highly audited software. And they're going to see how those first two waves kind of go. And now I think the difference is, versus 15 years ago, is that folks do have internal teams that are set up with a mandate to build steel thread architectures, reference architectures, prototypes, et cetera. Businesses, as technology, makes the building of tech have less cycle time, they should be judging executives on, well, how many ideas are we identifying per quarter? How many business cases are they tied to? How many experiments have you done? What's your capacity for experimentation and product growth? And I think the managing to the capacity of these things is very different than managing to your budget for headcount for team A versus product line B, et cetera.
Right.
And we will see some of those changes, but I think I think it has to increase. And I think that, companies were they knew it was coming. I think most folks I talked to thought they'd have a little bit more of the modernization stuff on the enterprise side under their belt going into 2030 or 2027. So the spike of this getting, a lot of media coverage in 2023, it's definitely put things on the radar. I do think it's going to continue, but I think everyone had to say, oh, look, my team did this thing, right? Here's the piece of value that we identified. And in relation to something you were asking earlier, I was going to say, think about all that mainframe code at banks that's out there, right? And I was mentioning what Jassy said about the Java code. And as you and I have lived through personally with tons of different PHP frameworks, et cetera, a lot of that work people are really dealing with in a way that is very efficient and effective for the business, and being able to use AI to even run full test batteries against it, right? To kind of validate code is working.
Exactly.
So I think those strategies are going to continue to take off, and it's just going to shift the focus of the team. So like, okay, how do we gain ground or not lose ground against our competitors, as this set of tools is what is being positioned in the market as differentiating?
Yeah, I agree. I think innovation will continue. We do see obviously a lot of talk around some hard limits of physics and things like that with energy consumption. And maybe that'll become more and more of a thing as these bigger and bigger models come into play or whatever. It is a little bit telling that GPT-5 wasn't released yet. They went from 4 to 4.0 and not to 5. But then you see Claude doing amazing. Perplexity continuing to innovate. There's certainly lots of innovation, but the large language models, it seems like they're going to have to figure some things out before they get, to version 6, 7 of GPT, for example. NVIDIA chip efficiency certainly helps that whole situation out. But I think it's hard to sort of predict, I think, for anyone when ChatGPT 6 is going to come out and what it's going to be capable of doing. I agree with you that that first lamb to slaughter thing with the call centers all over the world. I think that they are very nervous. They seem very nervous when I talk to my CEO friends in that world. They're really trying very hard to embrace AI and transform themselves into an AI-based service provider that has very sophisticated capabilities that their customers in Europe or the US would be and in other places might be looking for. And so they've got, and I talked to a friend the other day who's like, I took a bunch of people and I just put them on this topic of building our own AI capabilities out. I took them off of customers and just focused them on this, you know.
Yeah,
And I think they're very worried, and I do think that's a legitimate worry. That's a thing that they should be very careful about. And there's other industries also in similar boat, but by and large, it seems like the companies that are embracing the tools, are learning the fastest, are going to be in the best position. I mean, just think about like the newspaper industry, and they didn't embrace the internet for God knows how long,
that have.
and it was the ones that did that seemed to survive the best, and the ones that didn't, they met a difficult ending. Um, now, Pat, shifting gears here a little
Yeah,
bit, you've been CEO of Modus for a while now, right?
it
10
clear.
plus, more than 10 years, right? How long have you ran Modus for?
Uh, Started the company in 2011,
Okay.
and we bootstrapped it until 2021. We had a lot of dynamic growth from 2019 through the pandemic. I think partly because of where we're positioned, as I mentioned, the mobile economy. Also, just in terms of this
All right.
idea of companies formalizing corporate innovation and product teams. And but then during the pandemic, from business continuity perspective, folks were really trying to embrace distributed, time zone oriented, right, product aligned teams, more self kind of reliant, self sufficient
Right.
teams. And then we picked a growth partner in 2021, did a couple acquisitions over the last 2 years, and so it really has been kind of a learning journey. I mean, going from
Yeah.
starting just thinking, hey, let's try to build a services company in the image of an open source team, and that growing with mobile, I think faster than we had ever thought. Right, the company we thought I never really thought the company would be more than 25 people. I think we're around 500-600 today in like
Right.
65 countries, which is insane. Um, but I do think even in terms of like what does it even mean to be a company, and how does company structure and maintain a culture when it's so distributed? There's been a lot of things where I think, to your point, right? Like if we put AI aside for a second, I think the companies that win, I often tell clients, like a lot of the best knowledge workers, engineers, especially, they don't really care if you're a media company or a healthcare company. They care, like, do you have a great developer experience working here? Do you have good platforms and tools? Are you invested in kind of the trade craft? People want to move up, right? And with a company that is investing with technology core to value creation for the business. And part of that is how corporate innovation or product growth strategies align. And I do think that this is like the single biggest thing, is that we live in a world where it's better. The world that's ending, shall I say, the analog world, was a
Yeah.
world of certainty, like yearly
Yeah.
budgets and predictable growth.
Mm.
And companies that know how to manage uncertainty, I think, are the companies that win. And there are multiple strategies for managing business uncertainty, product uncertainty, right, engineering kind of uncertainty, and not just changing for the sake of changing, but doing
Mm.
it in a way that creates, as I like to refer to, this kind of it's the opposite of the vicious cycle, uh,
Virtuous cycle?
the virtuous cycle. Thank you. Where
Right.
the way that you invest in technology creates a very fulfilling, enriching developer experience, employee experience, right? And that is the stickiness that the you don't need to have a cool, hip-looking startup office, right? For these teams, you're basically saying we're going to be high-fiving all these wins in the market. If we do use open source, we're going to be contributing back, and that's a vehicle. The company is a platform for you to get some visibility in your career. And my personal kind of dumbing down of this strategy is, as a leader, you want to hold your managers accountable, right? Terrible managers are
Mm.
what kind of destroy most cultures. And so if you're essentially building a culture focused on how do we evolve our people quickly into their tradecraft, where every year they become more valuable in the market, that is going to force us as leaders to be attentive to, are we retaining these people or are we losing these people?
Absolutely. And one of the things you guys did really well, I think, at Modus, most companies seem to struggle with this, is you created like the right culture and structure around remote work. and so many of your people obviously work remotely. Like, what are some tips to kind of get that right? Let's say you're a $100 million company or two
Yeah.
hundred million dollar company, and you've decided that hybrid or mostly remote or something like that is going to be your model.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that that actually is effective? It's easy to say it.
Yeah.
You know that it's very hard to actually set that up right.
Yeah. I think I'll tell you, like, a lot of scars on my back, obviously. Okay. So a lot of mistakes and just recovering quickly. I think you read books like Accelerate, and a lot of the metrics
Mm,
that apply there on software systems also apply to culture, right? Like,
mm,
as I like to say to the team, there's certain things I expect us to that we're good at, we should get better at quarter over quarter. There's certain things we suck at, we should suck less at quarter over quarter, right? And you need
right.
to address, right, both. I think companies often give a lot of lip service to things, but they don't really enact change. The second is you have to really understand where you are as a stage of business, right? There's certain things small companies are going to do better than big companies. And there's a certain set of things that if you've never led through growth before, you're going to have a lot of scars on your back. Because I feel like when companies similar to Modus grow quickly from 50 to 100 or 100 to 500, you get into management theater. You overload administration and process on how you make decisions under the guise of scaling for infrastructure and operation and supports. And the analogy I've been using with the team is like sometimes you have to let those weeds get out of control and cut it back. And
Hmm.
from a, from a delivery perspective, we were very opinionated in the early days of Modus to only hire folks that were mid-career, self kind of, directed folks that I did not feel that the company was the place to be your first job. I felt like, okay, someone else should train you on what Agile is or isn't. Someone else should give you some experience. Okay, once you've hit your 5-year mark, then if you feel like you've topped out on some of these other type of jobs, then you can come here, but you're going to be expected to be self-reliant, to be, you know what I mean, leaning
Hmm.
it. And now that we've crossed over that 500 mark, this is where I think some of those other conversations open up, where really to grow from 500 beyond, it's really a matter of how well do you train your people? Like, do you really have well-defined jobs? Do you have mechanisms that don't expect everyone to come in day one knowing everything? And how do you develop folks to continue to grow in their career as they, grow within their roles within the company? And that's spent a lot of time with our leadership team on that, for the last couple of years.
Hmm. Yeah, you guys have done a good job at it. What seemed to happen after the pandemic sort of died down is there was obviously a lot of people, big tech companies asking folks to come back. They lost a lot of people because of that. Maybe some of that strategy maybe worked. It's hard to tell. I do think that measuring your sort of output and productivity in engineering is really important. Um, do you guys do any of that at Modus? Is that a thing that you guys think of as important? There's a lot of companies that do. It seems like they're moving towards that. They use products like Jellyfish or,
Good.
some of the other ones that are out there, the Linear B and things like that. Is that something that Modus believes in? Or then there's companies that are like, no, it's all about the finished product. If you can hit the outcome, forget productivity. It's all about the outcome. Are you delivering on the outcome or not? Like, what end of
Yeah.
the spectrum are you
So
on
yeah, let
in that?
me there's a couple pieces there because most of our work is in services, right? So we're working within clients. A lot of clients are running metrics, but to your point, some are more on the pedantic, as opposed to the outcome oriented or activity over outcomes.
Right.
I would start by saying this. I always get asked, "Oh, you're remote first. How do you know anyone's working?" Right? And my answer to that is I don't. I don't know if anyone's working, okay? And that's not my job. But if our culture works, then it's your colleagues that are going to fire you, right? Because they're the ones who you are setting expectations with. And so in terms of how our broader accountability, I don't believe in Mickey Mouse rules. You know what I mean? I don't believe in kind of this pedantic micromanagement,
Hmm.
especially at leadership level. At a team level, I feel like sometimes it often is hard to find. There's many reasons why in a remote company, someone may be underperforming. One of their kids might have gotten a horrible illness and be in the hospital. And so I do think there are challenges in a remote company to being able to kind of build and develop trust and rapport across the staff beyond the project or functional team they're on. And we try to do a lot of things that just build a lot of human connections, almost as a safety mechanism, because oftentimes when we hire folks, especially folks, working from developing economies, they've often worked at companies that have terrible cultures and a very heavy-handed kind of approach, and they don't think escalating is okay. So I feel like there's certain things there we're tuned to, right, from a culture perspective, that make that work.
The thing you said about like your peers will end up firing you, I think is a really powerful idea. Micromanagement of product and engineering teams, other teams I'm sure is the same, almost never seems to work in the long run here in the US at least. That's not the right culture, I think. But a lot of companies do it, and they do it for seemingly good reasons because they're not getting the productivity that they think that they should.
Yeah.
And it's always that nuance of like, well, what do you think the productivity should be? Yeah, we accept the deadlines were missed, or the scope was changed on the product too much, or, there was a lot of slippage or whatever. But one thing companies seem to struggle with is, what does good actually mean? Like, what is a fast engineering team? And I remember like back in the summer of 2004, 2005, I was running like a 5-person engineering team, and we built in one summer what, like 10 years later, it took another company I was consulting with. It took them like a year and a half to build that same thing that we built. So I knew, okay, fine, same exact product. This one got built in 3 months. That got built in 18 months. Clearly, the second team was much slower, but it may not be their fault. There could be bureaucracy that's slowing them down, process, all kinds of other things. Now, fundamentally, Pat, you've been in the software business for a long time, services business for a long time. How do you view good teams versus bad teams when you think about velocity, quality, cost, things of that nature? Like what is your definition of that?
Yeah. I would say it changes by the stage of growth or maturity of the business, right? And I think to your point, like some of these big enterprises that get into these weird shared services models where it's like you're endlessly filing tickets to be able to do a thing. And then, inevitably management consultants come in and break apart the budget for the shared services team, put it back into individual lines of business. And there's just some of those kind of cycles. But I do agree with you. Look, the reason why Modus is called Modus Create is that I never really enjoyed working on feature accretion teams. I always loved building the new thing or rebuilding the thing. And I feel like, again, I've been educated in the last 15 years. There's a whole management science around uncertainty, but I felt like some people just love the thrill of that, right? They love building new stuff or attacking or rewriting some legacy stuff in a new technology, or, there's a danger to always kind of chasing the shimmering, new thing. But the mindset for building something from nothing and the force of will that is required on a team to know that everyone's saying you can't do it or you can't whatever. But some people get off on the thrill of saying, okay, hold my beer. We're going to do this thing. And I'm going to put a team together of hunter killers that are just going to do the wolf pack, and we're going to get it done. And in my early career, going from global engineering company to working at an early startup in DC, Cvent, I mean, we were like working 12, 14 hours a day, drinking, building the stuff, a lot of energy. We were young. So there was like a certain kind of like, age demographic plus appetite for risk plus enthusiasm about working in this new thing that was going to change the world. That was, sometimes we were right on the money. Other times maybe we were drinking our own Kool-Aid. But the mindset of the people, right? And then the bigger you get, so shifting from that kind of team to a 200-person team and working on government finance software with a million levels of oversight and rules to understand, I do feel that it's valuable in having, as a leader, like to me it was valuable, and I never thought about it until like retrospectively, but working at big companies as an employee, working at startups as an employee, working as a consultant in government scale projects, like very few things of the scale of the U.S. government, right, or military. And there's certain business cases for software and architectures that don't even matter until you're into like moving $100 billion from one bank account to the next, Then you start to learn about atomic rollbacks and other levels of message queuing and all kinds of stuff that small web apps never going to need.
It does seem like the culture of product and engineering doesn't encourage measurement of itself, whereas the culture of sales and marketing lives and dies on measurement of itself. They want to measure off most of the time, the good teams, they're measuring the living crap out of themselves. Did this campaign work? What does our funnel look like? What is our pipeline? 1,001 measurements. So you have these like really gregarious social people in marketing and sales who aren't engineers typically, and they're not math people, and they're measuring everything, and it's usually pretty transparent, at least at that ELT level. Then you've got product and tech people who often are coming from science backgrounds or engineering backgrounds, and they don't want to measure anything. They're really resistant to this idea of measuring every nuance of what they're doing. I think what's going to happen is AI is going to put continuous pressure on producing a high volume of output in product and engineering. And boards and ELTs are going to say, hey, you know what, this Modus team over here, what's it producing versus the in-house client team or whatever? And let's compare those. And if Modus is crushing it, let's shift our resources over there. And the only way that you're going to be able to prove that is through some amount of measurement. Now, I'm not saying do the Mickey Mouse measurements of every nuance in the world. I think it's funny because when teams in product engineering do start to measure themselves, then they take it to an extreme that doesn't make sense either. You have to really find the exact right metrics for you. For example, if you're making an EHR EMR system where for like an electronic medical record system, quality matters a lot. So your metrics around quality are going to be like really, really important. But if you're a startup and the name of the game is just output and speed, then maybe you're not going to care about the quality metrics as much. But if you really get your metrics figured out right, I think it's a very good and important thing to measure product engineering from multiple different angles. And I think that is going to need that continue to increase until product and engineering are on par with how sales and marketing measure themselves. I think AI is going to force that issue more and more, in my opinion. That's what I'm seeing out there. I think it just works better when you can see like, oh, well, hey, I did 50 discovery calls in product. Not a single one of them resulted in a production-worthy tool or feature or whatever. Then that's like a good thing to know, I don't think we should shy away from that.
I agree with you, and I do see that happening, right? I think if you're a big company and you're running a vendor management strategy, I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, AI, it has to push all businesses up the value curve, okay? Because it's taking ownership of a lot of things that are valuable for people to do now, that the whole name of the game in software the last 20 years is automate people out of everything you can automate people out of, right? I mean, quite honestly. So I think, yes, if you're a large-scale business looking to vendor management, I think it also helps, sitting on that side, to know that as a vendor, the way to win more share of wallet from your client is to be able to point to those ROI metrics, that $1 going into this machine, regardless of the cost of my people, is netting you out X number of dollars of whatever.
Or I'm saying even throughput metrics, like what's the throughput 100%. Of a Modus team,
100%. I think that we do see folks getting there. And I think that's just a healthy part. I think what it also means in a lot of businesses, it does mean that having a industry kind of subject matter solution orientation, that if you are a services company and you need to be conscious of your customers, not that they're a web app or a mobile app or a whatever, it is, okay, we know a lot about healthcare and we have this kind of, you should choose us not just because of our ability to build a solution, but we've integrated with every, whatever it is, these industry qualifiers that help folks kind of enable the business side. I think one of the interesting things for me, 15 years in on services or 20, is that you sit as a fly in the room in a lot of industries and you learn a lot, and if you have the right kind of client relationships for the right amount of time, you're going to get really smart about ed tech or healthcare or automotive, whatever your client, and that's an asset to you. You should leverage it. The other thing I just wanted to mention, you're talking about AI, it reminded me of a conversation I had with one of our practice leads where, when you think about applied research versus software engineering, when you think about testing an algorithm, there is experimentation that's happening. There are certain types of work where if you think about, we acquired some businesses that have a lot of PhDs in advanced mathematics that they're building and testing models. It's a very different set of approaches than building software requirements or user stories.
Right.
You build the model, you're training the model, you're seeing if the results are lining up, you're augmenting that
So much more experimental, yeah.
100%. And that's where I go back to, and I think that's where, where I think it's important not just to position my business, but any business, is that the reality of the market is that companies used to do scenario planning on business model evolution every 10, 20 years. And that created a ton of money for the McKinseys, the Bostons, right? You name it, big consultants. People are welcome to the world of never-ending scenario planning. If new technology is coming over the horizon 5 years faster than people thought, every business has to look at, how could this hurt us? How could this help us? How could this make our operations more efficient? What do we need to know how to do?
Yeah, very insightful, Pat. Pat, you've been a CEO for many years now. What's the biggest challenge now with your role as a leader of this 500-600 person organization?
Right.
You're building software for all kinds of different clients, all kinds of industries. Tech innovation is through the roof. You've got the big tech companies that are now become so political. There's a post-pandemic questions about remote work still lingering around all over the place. Like, what's the hardest thing about being a CEO? Because that cannot be an easy job right now.
Yeah, I would say that, at the end of the day, I feel like most companies compete with themselves, right? Your biggest competitor is the person in the mirror, and the dysfunction that high growth can yield. In big companies, you can grow too fast. So when I think about that in terms of my role, right, I came from the consulting side of the business, and early on in the business, I had to kind of decide, is my job to be the best kind of UX product person here, or is my job to build structures that can enable teams of these people to grow? And that's where I kind of saw my career growing. And now when I think about this kind of broader company, that's what I think about. Parts of my role become more of a head of state function, right? It is hard to celebrate and to get alignment in this kind of a distributed model. And part of my role elevates certain areas of focus for the business to keep us aligned, but also to celebrate a lot of the teams like recruiting and others that rarely get celebrated, And,
Sure.
and to then with my physical presence, kind of take the leadership as our management cadence kind of evolves quarterly to, as I refer to it, the four corners of Modus land, right? We'll have meetings in Europe. We will try to move around the business and engage with teams in all the countries that, that we have folks. And that takes a lot, right? You could just kind of spend a lot of time. But what that does in terms of my role, on the operating side is really to make sure we have a competent operating leadership team and to be investing, right? So at the end of the day, I think about it in terms of my role is to give my leadership team the resources they need to execute and to make sure we have focus and alignment on what those goals are for this year, for what company we're trying to ultimately position in the market. And then to try to help build human connections, because that's, I think, the biggest challenge of this kind of business. And if businesses broadly, whatever dust settles with the return to work kind of movements, I generally don't have big opinions on that. I just worry about what makes it work for Modus. But I feel that distributed teams, it's tough to celebrate someone's birthday. It's tough to help someone when, someone in their family is sick and you could otherwise bring ill or something.
Yeah.
And so
Do you find
build that,
is a huge chunk of your time just building alignment? Because it's a distributed team, because it's growing, because there's thousands of customers, blah, blah, blah. Is it just a huge chunk of your time is spent building alignment, or is it that you're mostly spending time repeating the vision? You're always on a roadshow for, hey guys, here's where we're going to be in 5 years, or some combination of all these things?
Yeah, a lot of my time is on reinforcing the vision and the mission. The thing is that building a shared understanding in a company, I mean, think about it, most software projects fail because of lack of shared understanding. When you create terms of art in a business and you have people in 60 countries and you say a phrase like, we're going to take our consulting up the value chain, that can be misinterpreted into 50 things. Some people would say, oh, we're just going to raise our rates on all of our clients. Other folks would say, oh, we're going to build a whole new way. And so what I've kind of realized is like, as a business, you have to create your own terms of art. And these concepts...
Pat, can you explain what that means? I'm not sure if I even understand what terms of art is.
So within a business, I would say to you, to make it very specific to Modus, that I believe in productized consulting, okay? I feel like if you're just a labor arbitrage provider, you're going to just slippery slope all the way down to the bottom of the value stack, and you have to be providing more value. Well, to get shared understanding from my team of what does productized consulting mean? Does it mean we only do work on products? Does it mean that we encapsulate certain types of engagements so that they're getting to a decision quickly or increasing the learning for a client in a fixed amount of time? And so I had to really deconstruct these words that I was intimately familiar with to things that were more corporately understood. Productized consulting means that we're delivering specific value in a specific time frame with a deliverable that increases the client's knowledge to make a decision to either fund something or wait. And so just getting a shared understanding of what these kind of terms mean allow the broader team to say, okay, my job is I run the strategy practice or I run the digital operations practice. So what does productized consulting mean within that practice area, right? They have the autonomy to do that, but we need alignment on what kind of company are we building and what words do we use to describe our value in the market.
Okay, that makes sense. Pat, as we wrap up here, you've done some great work in Modus for me in the past. Tell our audience a little bit about the kinds of technologies you guys are using at Modus, the kinds of platforms you guys build or help companies create. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yep. So, I think when I first met you, Bobby, we were transitioning from a company that was just very good at open source for web and mobile-based applications and really good at understanding this emergent class of technology around JavaScript frameworks and what that could do for customer experience. And Modus today is kind of a much more broad value proposition. We have 4 practices. Our core practices are our product and platform development. Within our platform and cloud practice, we actually focus on a lot of security as well. Because we work in a lot of regulated industries, a lot of clients want to start with audits of their risk from a security perspective to drive their modernization journey. Whereas I think historically with mobile, people wanted to start with user experience and that kind of, product strategy and then work into technology. We do a lot in our third practice, which is digital operations, which is implementing all the tools around a business that allow you not to have to build custom software. So think about everything from your cloud, migrating to the cloud, setting up automation with tools like GitHub, Atlassian to manage portfolios, et cetera. And how do we actually enable those platforms to service the software and the kind of the business case. And then the practice that we've really stood up over the last few years is our strategy practice. So specifically with larger clients, and you asked me kind of what kind of clients. So what we found, a lot of our growth is being led by this global 2000 client base that have 6 global markets, multiple brands, and this huge kind of diaspora of vendors, whether they're marketing agencies, whether they're creative agencies, whether they're engineering services firms, they're all building different IP that the company doesn't own. And Modus is getting brought in to look at how do we build common platforms, leveraging open source, that the company actually owns the IP on. So we can put a common security layer on it. So if you're building websites for every hotel or you're building companion apps for every car, how do you know that that's all sitting on a common set of platforms where we're lowering the cost to leverage every digital channel for 40 brands around the world in 6 global markets? And so where we have really tried to align our business is on this idea that if you're going to execute a multi-year modernization journey and you're trying to deal with disruptive technologies, there is really a lot of things you're doing in parallel over the next 3 to 5 years. And you want a partner that's really invested in the right layer of that work, that can scale a lot of it, but isn't going to be the whole end all be all of your engineering solutions. We want to be that ideal partner for that chief digital officer, that chief transformation officer, for those product and technology leaders that are really trying to modernize the business as they increase its competitive footing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I mean, tell us a little bit about, Pat, like the kinds of platforms you guys build. So, there's all sorts of like sort of work you guys have done in different industries. You certainly worked a lot in ed tech, and
Yeah,
can you give us some examples of the kinds of platforms that you build?
sure, absolutely. So, I was mentioning, we have some large automotive platform customers. Those folks are really looking at the entire customer experience around customizing a vehicle, seeing that vehicle get made, creating
Right.
kind of the companion applications to surround that customer with value, and turn the car into a software platform where there's other subscription
That's
revenue that
right.
can be purchased inside the vehicle. That requires integration into multiple levels, right, of a technology stack.
Yeah.
And a lot of our work would start historically where I mentioned where our strengths were, and a lot of clients would find us because they're trying to evaluate mobile web versus hybrid mobile versus native applications and understanding what is the cloud native architecture to support that. But once you really get into that kind of platform work, there is the platform level architecture teams that we would be putting on the ground. There would be the product enablement teams, like building a lot of the frameworks and libraries to enable the brands to execute. And then on a per brand basis, so you think about a large automotive firm, global automotive firm, you might be interacting with the marketing team from a brand to leverage this technology platform where they historically would be going to the market to find their own vendor to build them a one-off right solution. And so we see this as a general trend that we're seeing across industry. A lot of our focus in the last, 5 or 6 years has been in life sciences businesses. And so if you think about
Hmm.
the pre-pandemic universe, there is so much potential for what digital can do in some of these industries that were slow to adopt and struggled to execute at scale, right? Technology first strategies.
Right.
We've talked about things like digital therapeutics, where the phone becomes the medical device, and really thinking that through all the way from how do you look at clinical trials and how
Yep.
do you get creating these branded experiences, and then also direct to consumer. So as many of the largest pharma companies in the world don't want to sell through field sales, they want to have a direct, you have been educated onto a medical diagnosis, you can get just-in-time access to a physician in a regulated way to be able to get prescribed medications. There's a whole world of rethink that's happening in some of these, but a lot of our work is to help set the reference architecture, scale that into a cloud native platform, and then make it kind of white labelable, if you will, for all the brands that can leverage it under one house. So you're not replicating that million plus budget in every brand that wants to have
Right.
a similar experience.
Okay, I think we're at the end of our time. It was great talking with you today, Pat. I always learn so much, and I'm sure our listeners will have taken a lot from this discussion.
Thanks, Bobby. I really appreciate, always enjoy chatting with you, and look forward to the next time we can get together.
I also want to thank all the listeners for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on the Technocratic Podcast. In the meantime, keep the sharks swimming.